The insurance policy taken by the owner of the ship and its equipment are known as the hull policy. So the loss that is going to incur because of the non-hiring of ship, that would also be covered under the hull policy. Good morning and welcome to the session 4 in Unit 2, Principles and Practice of General Insurance, where we are going to speak about the hull policy. Now, moving further, what is this hull policy all about? The insurance policy taken by the owner of the ship and its equipment are known as the hull policy. Now, when you talk about a large ship, it has got several components, several working parts all together. So the owner of the ship, when you talk about the factors in terms of owning the ship and its equipments, the composite factor put together is known as the hull policy. It's basically a property insurance which covers the ship itself, the machinery and the equipment. So when you are looking at the ship when it's going to be taken into full form or the full factor altogether, we are going to call it as the hull policy. So we say the ship itself, the machinery and the equipment. So the ship put together in the fullest form together would be the hull policy in factor. Now, furthermore, the insurance covers some liabilities, normal collision liability with another ship, sometimes the liability of colliding with other objects other than the ship. Now, we all know about the story of Titanic, what happened. So similarly, there might be a possibility if the ship goes and collides with other than a ship, like an iceberg or an island or rock or something like that, where that can cause a damage to the ship altogether. So what we are interested here to know about the hull policy is that we need to worry more about the factors that the ship is going to look forward in terms of the another ship. That is where we are looking in terms of covering the ship from any kind of collision or any kind of the physical movements altogether. So whatever is that, where we start looking for the liabilities coverage, the hull policy is a comprehensive policy that is being used in terms of managing the entire activity. The owner's insurable interest, that is the capital interest asset which we are talking about, potential legal liabilities, income interest factor. So all these three things are very, very important altogether. So that's how we have been looking into this factor. Why? Because the capital asset, that is the factor called as the asset itself, that is the ship, the investment that has been made into it, that's very, very important here. So we call it as the capital asset interest. The second factor is called as the potential legal liabilities, the legalities that can arise out because of this factor. Next, we are going to talk about the income interest factors altogether. So what is going to be the income factor because of the ship being in action? Now, if you look into this hull policy for a while, you will be able to understand this very clearly, stating that whenever we are looking into the ship, it is actually an investment. So the entire ship here is an investment factor for all of us. So there's a huge amount of money that has been invested into the logistics business because we are going to use this ship for a transportation mode altogether. Followed by, there is a lot of potential legal liabilities that are associated with the sea transport. Now, the capital amount that is borrowed in terms of investment in logistics sector is pretty much huge. So what happens is that the insurance factor that comes for this coverage for this particular sector is also very high. So the insurance companies first make a very clear-cut assessment trying to understand whether we can go in and cover up the entire factor. Because if the insurance sector once agrees saying that they are going to cover your capital asset, that means there's a huge sum of money which is already in stake. So the capital asset covering factor itself is going to be a very big challenge here. followed by the potential legal liabilities. Now, when I talk about the legal liabilities, the potential legal liabilities, what are all the legal factors that are associated with the hull policy, with the ship, the equipment, the machinery, and other factors? Suppose the ship is involved in some kind of transaction which is illegal, or the ship is trying to do something which is used for an illegal purpose. All those kind of legalities, how the ship is going to be used, from where it is going to trade, what kind of machinery, what kind of equipment, what kind of seas we are going to trade with, all those things are a factor of the potential legal liabilities. Why do I use this word again? Because if you are from the insurance company side, the most important or the diligent factor that you would be interested upon, that you would want to be included, is that you will try to calculate each and every aspect of the ship in terms of its machinery, movement, and all the cost factors that are associated. Finally, you will also talk about something called as the income interest that comes out of it. Now, for all the people who are investing money in terms of the logistic business, they find that there's a huge source of income that can be arrived. So when you're talking about the income factor that can be arrived out of the ship, if some damages happen to the ship, then automatically the income will also get affected. So what the shipping companies, the insurance will try to do is that first try to make an assessment, as in to see that what is the potential factor of income that can be affected in case if the ship gets damaged, in case if the ship comes to some trouble. So based on all this calculation only, they will be able to come back and do the owner's insurable interest. So if the owner is going to come back and claim an insurance worth of 500 crores or 1000 crores, then what is going to happen here is that they are going to first check the potentiality that is involved with it, and then they will take up the call. The hull policy. How does the hull policy come into picture? Now, when you talk about the hull policy, the hull is based on the H&M, hull interest, the builder's risk, the mortgagee interest insurance factor. Now, these are all a very, very important thing that we need to understand here. The asset capital. So the asset capital is the ship here. The ship is going to be covered by the H&M factor. Then we are going to talk about the builder's risk. So what are all the risk factor that is associated in terms of building that ship altogether. So all this matter will be taken into factor. And if the ship is going to be mortgaged for some purpose altogether, what is the risk and the insurance factor that is associated with this? So with all these factors keeping in mind only, we will be getting into in terms of the asset capital insurance factor. Now, the income loss of hire, loss of the freight interest factor. Now, a ship needs to be hired. Now, this is a very, very important concept that you need to understand. A ship will not be just taken up for a rental basis. It's going to be hired for a specific purpose. Now, if there is no transportation business at all, now let's take the pandemic scenario itself. Because of the last 2-3 months, there was no much of business, no transportation, no logistics into picture. So the loss of hiring a ship, so the loss that is going to incur because of the non-hiring of ship, that would also be covered under the hull policy, followed by the freight interest factor. What is the freight interest factor? The loading, unloading charges of the goods into the ship, the freight interest that is associated, that also will be taken up here, followed by the third-party liability. The third-party liability is usually taken by P&I and the H&M. These are the two factors, these are the two companies which are involved in the hull policy altogether. Why? Because third-party liability is some sort of damage that can be caused altogether for the ship, and in case if that damage is going to be notified identified, if that damage is going to be calculated and taken into position, the H&M and the P&I will come in factor in terms of assessing the damage that is caused from the third party coverage, that's caused by the third party incidents altogether. Now, the H&M cover, there are 3 clauses for that. Now, the H&M cover is a kind of package that is being offered altogether. Now, what is this coverage? Is that the Norwegian Marine Insurance Plan of 1996, the updated version on 2003. This is a kind of plan which will detail out what are all the coverages, what are all the packages that you need to understand, that you need to undertake with the Shipping Institute altogether. So, there would be a set of clause. When I say a set of clause, terms and conditions that would go ahead in terms of this particular factor. So you need to understand, when we set this Norwegian Marine Insurance Plan, they set out certain sailing conditions for that particular ship. So when I say sailing conditions, what do I mean by it? When the ship is set to sail, there are certain clauses, there are certain terms and conditions alone which the ship will be allowed to sail from one port to another. That has been told under this condition. So suppose if they are violating that clause, if they are not following that rules and regulation, then automatically the insurance will be cancelled, followed by the English Institute of Time Clauses and Hulls, which was done at a very long time in the year 83 altogether. Now, when we start looking about this, because the shipping business was actually originated by the British and the European, most of these hull clauses and policies have been done by them in a very, very long time altogether, followed by the American Institute of Hull Clauses. Now, the Americans also were involved in terms of shipping, so they had come up with a plan that came up on the year June 2nd, 1977, when they had spoken about the American hull clauses. Now, what happens here is that when you are taking the H&M cover, the H&M cover will comprise of all these 3 policies. So this is where you are going to talk about the H&M policies altogether, or the coverage value altogether. So this will try to cover all the factors that are involved here, followed by the English clauses. The English clauses have been issued in newer versions that are not widely used, but the newest version, known as the Hull clause, which came in 2003, appears to have one support and may be a substitute for the ITCH, which is one form in the future. Now, why is this factor coming into thing is that when you look into the shipping business itself, this is a very, very new form of emerging business. This business is not so widely appreciated in many of the countries. Why? Because you do not have very much of active trading ports across the globe. Very few countries have really understood, analyzed the active trading ports. Now, if you go back to the Indian subcontinent, starting from Mumbai, then we have the Cochin port, then we have the Calcutta port, what we are involved in terms of trading, followed by the Chennai port, followed by the we have a little bit of factors that is also be taken into the ideology. The thinking factor is on the Gandhinagar port. Now, these are some of the areas where you would try to understand the Gujarat ports, the areas where we have the majority in terms of the trading business. Of course, the Visakhapatnam port is not being taken into consideration. Why? Because that's more of a naval base. The Paradip port in Orissa is also one of the minor ports that we are looking into picture. But India has got only about 4 or 5 ports, which is considered to be one of the biggest terminals, followed by the JNPT, which is also one of the big terminals that we talk about. So when you compare to that of the railways or the airways, the seaport business is comparatively smaller in terms of the operation, but the volume is very huge. The amount of business that is being done is very, very huge. But what happens here is that since the operation is quite limited in nature, the clauses, understanding of the clauses, working of the clauses have been updated time to time on a basis by the English system, which was not actually accepted at the initial level, but today it has been understood and people have started taking it in seriously. followed by the navigation clause. Now, navigation is very, very important. Why? Because this clause makes it clear that the vessel is covered all the times, including while sailing or navigating, with or without the pilots or the captain undertaking trial trips, rendering assistance to other vehicles or craft in distress. Now, what is a navigation clause? Now, we all know that ship tends to move from one port to another port. Now, the clause makes it very, very clear that the ship is completely covered, which means to say that the ship will continue to be in the insurance policy altogether whenever it is needed. That means during the time of sailing, also in navigating, with or without the captains altogether. So what we tend to do here is that we will tend to understand that the ship will try to provide some assistance, or the ship will try to carry another ship, a smaller ship, and all those factors. But this navigation will make you go through the factor that ship has to be covered at all points, whether it is sailing on a normal course or it is navigating under particular pulse or system. The ship will continue to hold up and take up that particular activity. So now what happens, that note, it is warranted that it shall not be towed unless to a safe place. Customary towage is okay. Now, generally just putting the ship into a safe zone and just holding it for a time is not accepted, but a customary towage, like, in terms of when it is required, when it is a time that in terms of boundary movement, then customary towage is accepted, or else it just parking the ship in a safe place, or just unless and until it is warranted, it is not being accepted as a part of the insurance clause altogether. Followed by the breach of warranty, which is a very, very important factor here to be told. This clause provides for the breach of warranty of certain specified warranties to be covered, subject notice to be given to the underwriters immediately after the receipt of advices or any amended terms or additional premium that needs to be added. Now, what is this factor all about? When you look at the ship business altogether, the clause says that in case if there is a breach of certain specified, when I say a breach, that means a violation of certain specified warranties, that is including in terms of the subject covered or any kind of movement, the underwriters will immediately acknowledge the receipt. They will say that these are the changes that has been happened of the advices and any amended terms of the additional premium being agreed upon. So in case if there is any violation, if there is any change, if there is going to be any movement, then automatically it will be acknowledged by the underwriters, and the premium that has been told or that has been understood will be immediately subjected to whatever terms and conditions that they have agreed upon. So this makes it very, very essential that in case if there is changes, if there are movements, or if there are any other factors that is being told upon, then it has to be agreed and it has to be moved as per the conditions. Termination. The cover might be terminated subjected to the events in clause 4. Suppose if the cover is not being followed, so the cover can be terminated from the insurance company subjected to the factor called in clause 4, which means to say that if there has been a breach or if there has been a violation to all the factors that has been mentioned, the shipping company has tried to go against the rules and regulation, they have tried to violate the entire situation and go forward, then there would be a termination of the insurance altogether. Now there, what they will try to do is that change of the class and ownership represents major changes, and this will lead to the termination of the insurance policy. So they very clearly mention this factor, stating that in case if there is going to be any changes, if there is going to be any sort of movements that would go ahead and make any kind of changes or any factor, then that would be considered to be completely against. They don't want to take up the risk, so they will say that there is a change factor, we will lead to the termination because you have not followed the rules and regulations that has been told. So definitely this would lead to a complete termination in case if there is a violation of the policy. With this, I come to the end of this particular session. I hope and believe that all the information that has been shared here through this particular session would be of a great value and resource to you. In the upcoming sessions, we shall see more about the insurance policies. Until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today on this wonderful session.